In the story of the West, she is a central, yet often silent, figure. Mary, the mother of Jesus. We see her in countless paintings, a serene, gentle woman, holding her divine child. She is the vessel, the handmaiden, the grieving mother at the foot of the cross. She is profoundly important, but the story is never truly about her. But what if this is only half the story? What if there's another tradition, an ancient and powerful one, where Mary is not a supporting character, but the star of her own epic narrative? A tradition where she is not just a mother of a prophet, but a chosen queen, purified and elevated by God above all other women in creation. This tradition exists, but it is not hidden in a secret vault or forbidden book. It is in the holy book of the world's second largest religion. This is Mary's secret journey, the story of how the humble mother of the Gospels became a powerful, revered queen in the Quran. And this journey reveals a secret history, a lost version of Christianity that may have been preserved for centuries in the heart of Islam. If you believe the greatest secrets are hidden in plain sight, subscribe and join us on a journey to meet the Mary you've never known. To understand a profound difference, we must first establish the portrait of Mary that has shaped Western civilization for 2 millennia. This is a Mary of the New Testament, a figure of quiet strength and profound, yet often passive, faith. Her story in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke is one of humility and acceptance. She is a young girl from the humble town of Nazareth, betrothed to a carpenter. Her life is upended by the visit of the angel Gabriel, who announces she will bear the Son of God. Her response is the cornerstone of her character in the West. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. It is an act of submission to a divine plan. She does not fully understand. The narrative that follows is centered entirely around her son. We see her giving birth in a manger, presenting Jesus in the temple, fleeing to Egypt, and anxiously searching for him when he is 12. During his ministry, she appears only sporadically, off in the background, a concerned mother watching from the sidelines. Her most powerful moment is one of profound grief, as she stands at the foot of the cross, watching her son die. After the resurrection, she is mentioned one last time, praying with the disciples, and then she vanishes from the biblical narrative. Later Christian traditions, particularly in the Catholic and Orthodox churches, would elevate her status significantly, declaring her the Mother of God, perpetually a virgin, and eventually assuming her body and soul into heaven. But in the foundational texts themselves, her story is strangely sparse. She is defined almost entirely by her relationship to Jesus. She is a vessel of grace, a model of piety and motherhood, but the details of her own spiritual life, her own inner world, her own struggles and triumphs remain largely untold. This is the portrait the West has inherited, a holy, silent, and ultimately secondary figure. But in the East, a very different story was being told. Now, we must travel 6 centuries forward from the time of Christ to the deserts of Arabia and open the pages of the Quran. Here, the story of Mary or Maryam is not a scattered collection of verses. It is the subject of an entire, powerful chapter named in her honor, the 19th Surah, Maryam. She is the only woman to be so honored in the entire Islamic holy book. In fact, she is mentioned 34 times in the Quran, compared to only 19 times in the entire New Testament. The Quranic narrative of Maryam's life is detailed, dramatic, and deeply personal. It begins before she is even born, with her mother vowing to dedicate her child to the service of God. Maryam grows up in seclusion in the temple, under the care of the prophet Zechariah. The Quran tells us she was miraculously fed, with angels bringing her sustenance, a sign of her unique and sacred status from a young age. The Annunciation is also different. The angel appears to her when she is in seclusion, and her reaction is one of fear and questioning, a deeply human response. But the most dramatic departure from the Gospels is the birth of Jesus, or Isa. The Quran tells us that Maryam, overcome by the pains of childbirth, retreats alone to the desert, to the trunk of a palm tree. In her moment of agony and despair, she cries out, wishing she had died before this moment. It is here that God intervenes directly. A voice calls out to her from below, telling her not to grieve. The dried-up stream at her feet miraculously begins to flow. She is told to shake the trunk of the palm tree, and ripe, fresh dates fall for her to eat. This is not a passive birth in a stable, attended by others. This is a story of a woman in isolation, in pain, who is personally and miraculously sustained by God. The story culminates in her return to her people. Accused of unchastity, she says nothing. She simply points to the infant in her arms. And then, the ultimate miracle occurs. The baby, Isa, speaks from the cradle. He declares himself a prophet of God, defends his mother's purity, and silences the accusers. In this tradition, Miriam is not just a vessel. She is a central actor in a divine drama, a woman of such profound faith that God alters the laws of nature for her and grants her infant son the power of speech to protect her honor. This is not the story of a handmaiden. This is the story of a queen. So, where did this incredibly detailed, dramatic, and reverent account of Miriam in the Quran come from? Was a new revelation, entirely independent of the Christian tradition? The answer may be found in the secret journey of Mary's story, through the pages of books that were deliberately excluded from the Bible, the Christian Apocrypha. When we compare the Quranic account of Miriam to very early non-canonical Christian texts written in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the parallels are stunning. The Proto-Evangelium of James, or Infancy Gospel of James, was an immensely popular text among early Christian communities, especially in the East. This book tells the story of Mary's own miraculous birth to her aged parents, Joachim and Anne. It describes her childhood being raised in the Temple of Jerusalem, a detail found in the Quran, but absent from the canonical Gospels. Other apocryphal texts, known as Infancy Gospels, are filled with stories of the miracles of the infant Jesus, including the story of him speaking from the cradle. The Quran's account of the palm tree providing dates to Mary during childbirth has a direct, stunning parallel in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, where a palm tree bends down on command of the infant Jesus to feed his mother during the flight to Egypt. The connections are too numerous and too specific to be a coincidence. This suggests a powerful hypothesis. The Quran did not invent these stories. Instead, it likely drew upon the rich, vibrant Christian traditions that were flourishing in the Near East and Arabia in the centuries leading up to the rise of Islam. These traditions, which held Mary in extremely high reverence and were filled with miraculous accounts of her life and Jesus' infancy, were preserved in these apocryphal texts. The secret journey of Mary's story is therefore the journey of these heretical or non-canonical Christian texts. While the church in Rome and Constantinople was consolidating its power, it began a process of creating an official canon, the New Testament we know today. In this process, many books, including these popular infancy gospels, were suppressed, declared apocryphal, and written out of the official history. But they didn't disappear. They survived and were revered in the very Christian communities where Islam would later emerge. The evidence suggests that Islam preserved a version of Mary's story that was once a part of a wider Christian tradition. This leads to the central question of our investigation. Why did the story change? Why did the Western Orthodox Christian tradition sideline these narratives and present the more reserved, silent Mary of the canonical Gospels, while the tradition that influenced Islam kept her as a powerful, central, miracle-working figure? The answer may lie in a great theological and political parting of the ways in the early centuries of Christianity. As the church grew and became a powerful institution within the Roman Empire, its priorities shifted. Theologians like Augustine and Jerome were engaged in fierce debates to define a strict, orthodox doctrine. The focus moved away from the folktale-like miracles of Jesus' infancy and Mary's life, and centered almost exclusively on profound, theological drama of the Passion, the Crucifixion, and the Resurrection. These were the events that held the keys to salvation and the foundation of the Church's authority. The apocryphal infancy Gospels, with their sometimes fantastical stories of a child God performing miracles, were seen as problematic, even embarrassing, by an institution that was trying to present itself as a serious, philosophical religion to the Roman elite. Furthermore, the intense veneration of Mary, which was so popular among the common people, was seen by some church fathers as dangerously close to the pagan worship of goddesses that Christianity was trying to supplant. And so, a conscious decision was likely made. The canon was solidified. The apocryphal Gospels were suppressed. The focus was narrowed. The Western Church, in its effort to create a unified and politically powerful orthodoxy, trimmed the narrative. In doing so, it relegated Mary to a more constrained, yet still honored role. But in the Christian communities of the East, in Syria, in Egypt, in Arabia, these older stories and the deep veneration of Mary continue to thrive, far from the centralizing power of Rome. It was this vibrant, Mary-centered form of Christianity that became one of the key religious currents in the world that Prophet Muhammad was born into. Our investigation leads us to a stunning conclusion. The exalted, powerful, and central role of Mary in the Quran is not a later Islamic invention. It is a preservation. It is a window, a precious echo of a lost, early form of Christianity that the West chose to forget. The secret journey of Mary was her journey of survival. While her story was being edited and constrained in the West for political and theological reasons, her full, miraculous narrative was being safeguarded in the East, preserved in apocryphal texts and oral traditions, and ultimately honored and cemented in the holy book of a new global faith. Islam did not create a new Mary. It embraced an old one, the one who was raised in a temple, who was fed by angels, who was sustained by God in the wilderness, and whose infant son spoke to defend her honor. The Quran's Maryam is perhaps the closest we can get to understanding the sheer power and reverence that the figure of Mary commanded in the hearts of the earliest Christian communities, before the councils and the creeds, before the editors and the emperors. She is a forgotten queen, not just of heaven, but of her own story. A story that, thanks to its preservation in a different faith, can now be rediscovered, revealing that the foundations of Christianity and Islam are more deeply and mysteriously intertwined than we ever thought possible.